Hello, everyone! It's already been 2 weeks since Alp Arslan was released, and I've finally finished this video. Without exaggeration, this was the hardest commander I've ever had to test, and today I'm going to share everything I managed to figure out about him. And some of the findings are just insane. I'll show a lot of tests and explain in detail how his crazy skills actually work, and of course, we'll decide whether he's worth your gold heads. I spent a ton of time and gems on farm accounts to test everything, so all I'm asking is that you drop a like on this video. To give you the full picture, I'll go through all of his skills one by one, and from time to time I'll back up my conclusions with tests. Don't worry, I'll try to keep it short and not drag the skill section out too much. I ran the tests in Custom Match Osiris, in balanced mode and with KVK buffs. You can also see the talents I used. I didn't make all the equipment Awaken 5 because that wouldn't be realistic, and even gear like this is far from something everyone has. Now let's get back to the skills. The first skill, and this is where I had a lot of questions. Damage factor 2000 to a single target is clear, but what wasn't clear was how the Lion Soul effect works. Let's read it again. Inflicts 1 stack of Pierce on the target troop every 3 seconds. Pierced targets take additional damage. Damage factor 100 every second for 5 seconds. This effect can stack up to 3 times, and its duration resets whenever it gains another stack. The first question I personally had was whether this stacks with other Alp Arslans, and the answer is yes. It stacks with other Alp Arslans without any problems. The game even shows them in the reports, which confused me at first. Like, why am I seeing my allies' damage in my reports? I thought that shouldn't happen, but that's how it works. If the commander's name is green, that's your damage. If it's black, that's not your damage, and it doesn't count toward your kill points. The next question was how exactly these Pierce stacks work. Do they reset after reaching stack up to 3 times? And the answer is no. Every 3 seconds they will keep refreshing while the Lion Soul effect is active, and once they reach stack up to 3 times, the stacks do not reset. When reading the battle logs, you can notice that the game says this is triggered by basic attacks, but in reality, that's not entirely true, only partly true, because the game still counts time. Every 3 seconds or 3 turns, you get a new stack. Also, you cannot increase your stacks using other Arslans, only with your own stacks. And overall, the stacks only stay as long as you keep hitting the target troop. The moment you stop attacking, even for a second, the stacks reset. But if the target received Pierce stacks, it will keep taking additional damage until the timer runs out, even if you're no longer attacking it. This also works with the third skill when we deal area damage, which is definitely a big plus. But the problem is that the stacks on the target basically do not stay at all, and every time you switch targets, you start building Pierce stacks from scratch. So, in a Murderball fight, you will almost never build up 3 stacks. In other words, if you start retreating, the stacks reset. But there is also one major upside that completely changes the game. After Arslan hits someone with his skill and gains the Lion Soul effect, and this is very important, it is this commander's troop that gets the Lion Soul effect, not the target troop. Anyone he touches will start receiving Pierce stacks, and you don't need to hit them with the skill. And those stacks will deal additional damage until the timer runs out, meaning at least 5 seconds, or at least damage factor 500. Let's look at the reports, and we can see that the third skill didn't even activate. All the damage we're dealing comes from the first skill, and it triggers as soon as we get a new target troop, and it will keep working even after we stop attacking that target. It only ends when the 5-second timer runs out. And honestly, that's insane, because when we're fighting in a Murderball, we sometimes stand still and just switch targets, or when we're pushing, everyone we touch will start taking additional damage if our march has the Lion Soul effect active. If you try to understand why this happens, it becomes clear that it's about basic attacks. They are what activate Lion Soul effect on the new target. And here comes the logical question. Do basic attacks always activate Lion Soul effect on a target? To test this, I did a test with Achilles, who has area damage with combo attacks, which also include basic attacks. But it didn't work, and the affected targets did not receive Pierce stacks. Overall, any attempt to turn the first skill into area damage failed, and the game follows its own rule that it only works on the target troop. To sum it up, the first skill is actually pretty good. Yes, it's not perfect because the stacks take a long time to build, but I really liked the fact that just one touch is enough to transfer Pierce stacks. And during pushes, this will be especially useful when you often switch target troop. There isn't much new to say about the second skill, except that thanks to it, we will quite often apply Pierce stacks right from the first seconds. The third skill is one of the most mysterious parts, and I'll say right away, yes, it works as area damage. To put it simply, Arslan is an area damage commander hitting up to 4 targets if we count the target troop. And now I'll try to explain in more detail how it works, because it's not as obvious as it may seem. I'll start with this. No matter who Arslan is paired with, whether it's Hermann, Zhuge, or Yi Seonggaye, you will usually activate the benevolence effect after the first skill hit. These are the average values I noticed across many tests. To be fair, Hermann sometimes does it faster thanks to his 4th skill with poison. But I wouldn't really call this a plus for Hermann, and you'll see why in a moment. If you still don't understand how it works, here's what happens. When the benevolence effect activates, it takes 2 random debuffs from the target troop that were applied specifically by our troop with Arslan. And this is an important point, which previously wasn't stated in the skill description, but Lilith changed it. I also tested this, and yes, that's exactly how it works. We only spread the debuffs applied by our own Arslan march. Debuffs applied by our other marches or by someone else will not be counted. So, we take 2 random debuffs from the target troop and infect 3 non-target enemy troops centered around the target troop. I want to emphasize that the area damage comes specifically from around the target troop, which is pretty unusual. I also want to clarify what non-target enemy troops means. Basically, it means any enemy marches that are not currently the target. Even if they are not attacking anyone at that moment, it will still work. It also works if they are hitting you but you are not hitting them. In simple terms, it means any marches except the target troop. Going back to the debuffs we spread, as I said, they are chosen randomly, and it works in a pretty unusual way. Let's say that at the moment the skill triggers, the target troop has only 2 debuffs, 15 stacks of poison and 3 stacks of pierce. These stacks have a timer showing when they expire. Let's say both have the same duration, 3 turns. So this is what the debuffs look like on the target troop at the moment the skill activates, and this exact state is what gets transferred to 3 non-target enemy troops. And this is both good and bad. It's good because we immediately transfer the accumulated stacks, but the problem is that their remaining duration can be very short, sometimes just 1 turn. In practice, though, the average duration of pierce stacks is around 3 turns, which is actually not bad. And if you have a lot of poison stacks on the target, that's exactly what gets transferred. The same goes for pierce stacks. If there were 3 stacks, then it will be 300 damage factor per turn. Pierce stacks really do work as area damage, and you don't even have to be attacking someone at that moment if they already received it. Pierce will keep dealing damage until its timer expires. I tried switching immediately to the target that had just received Pierce from the 3rd skill, but unfortunately, even in that case, the stacks do not stay, and after the timer ends, everything starts from scratch again. Okay, I think we've figured that part out, but there's another issue, specifically when Arslan is paired with Hermann. As I already said, the debuff is chosen randomly. In Hermann's case, this means that instead of pierce and poison, the defense debuff from Arslan's expertise and Hermann's 3rd skill, can be chosen, so Pierce stacks will not trigger every single time. To test this, I ran a test and counted how many times the first part of Arslan's third skill activated and how many times Pierce stacks were actually selected in the end. Hermann's result was pretty sad, 3 out of 5. That's because the game has to choose only 2 debuffs out of 4. With Zhuge, the situation is much better because the game only has to choose from 3 debuffs. Plus, Zhuge's debuff has a fairly short timer, so the chance of it being active is lower. But still, it did happen with Zhuge Arslan on turn 14, if we look at the report. Another important point, if Arslan is secondary, it lowers the chance that Pierce will be selected on the first activation. For example, Zhuge's active skill will trigger first, and on the next turn, Arslan's third skill will activate before Arslan has applied Pierce stacks to the target troop. Of course, Pierce stacks can be applied through Arslan's second skill, but that has a 5-second cooldown, and there's no guarantee it will happen at that exact moment. So to summarize, with Zhuge, Pierce will trigger in most cases. With Hermann, I'd say a 50% trigger rate is very realistic. We'll talk about this a bit more later when we move on to the pair tests. For the fourth skill, the most interesting question was what the damage factor would be, since it depends on the number of debuffs on the target troop. And I want to say that very often it will be at the maximum, and in the end, it makes up a significant part of Arslan's total damage. As for taking 10% less damage, it will be active almost all the time. As for the expertise, the defense debuff will stay up consistently and will often be 10%. But we can only apply the debuff to 3 targets at a time, even with Zhuge. Arslan's skills are very complicated and confusing, but I hope I managed to make them clearer for you. The next thing we'll talk about is the best pair for Arslan and, overall, how good he is in battle. And to figure that out, I ran a series of tests. Let's start with something simpler: regular duels. Personally, the most interesting thing for me was this: who wins, Hermann or Zhuge? And I want to say that in a duel against each other, it's not completely obvious. Zhuge won most of the time, but there were also cases where Hermann won. I ran the following tests with Zhuge, since he won more often. You can pause and take a closer look at the results, but overall, there's nothing too surprising here. The only thing worth noting is that archers can now actually offer something in duels, because before, things were pretty sad. I also have to mention that Zhuge against Philip was basically even. And Philip is not a dueling commander at all, and even in the report you can see that Arslan did all the work. But it's still too early to draw conclusions, because there are more meaningful tests. The next test was the hardest one of all. You could call it something like a Murderball simulation. The idea is that every 10 seconds we retreat back and then return to the fight, while other marches are fighting around us. This unusual troop setup was needed so that Arslan could reach all opponents with his third skill, because remember, the damage area comes not from our march, but from the target troop. I can't say this test is extremely objective because marches are moving, and because of that, the results can vary even with the exact same marches. So I want to point out that I ran this test with the same marches more than once, and I added the results to the table that I personally considered the most objective. The results turned out to be pretty interesting. The higher the Sev exchange value, the better. And Hermann and Zhuge have the same value. Overall, after all the tests, I got the impression that both of them work very well with Arslan, as do other archer commanders in general, but these two are definitely the best. This test was also meant to find out whether Arslan should be primary and whether his third skill is really that important, because when he is primary, the third skill works better. And judging by the results of this test, yes, he should be primary, because the numbers are noticeably better when Arslan is primary. Philip's results were also especially interesting after such an impressive duel performance, but unfortunately in this test he didn't really show himself. As for Qin Shi, his results with Arslan are pretty good, but that's mostly thanks to Qinshi himself. I specifically did a test with Qinshi Zhuge, and they performed even slightly better. So if you only have one archer march, Arslan will not boost you that much. Yixiong Gaye showed a good result, but Hermann and Zhuge fit Arslan better, so I don't see much point in separating him from Qinshi. And the tests don't end here. I also did a damage test, where we attack one march while 4 other marches just stand there and take damage from area damage. And here Hermann won, which overall isn't surprising because he applies poison stacks that build up, and in the end, this gives a pretty big increase in skill damage. This is also another confirmation that Arslan works better as primary. Philip also had a pretty good result here, and the last test is 5 versus 5. I'll be honest, I didn't really want to do it, because it's still far from real combat. In the Hermann versus Zhuge matchup, Hermann won, but only by a very small margin, and that's with the result that he built up a pretty good number of poison stacks. I also did a Hermann versus Philip test, and here I was really surprised, because Philip lost with no chance at all. It was a confident win for Hermann, and that was the final test. Let's summarize. I'll start by saying that even all of my tests do not fully reflect the real picture on the field, but we can already draw some conclusions. I liked how his skills work. I expected something different, but what we got is also pretty good. I especially liked that just one touch is enough to transfer a pierce stack, and the targets we hit will keep taking additional damage until the timer expires, even if we are no longer attacking them. What disappointed me is that pierce stacks basically do not stay, and every time you have to start all over again. We could keep talking about his skills for a long time, so I'll just give my overall impression. I liked Arslan, and I think that in real battles he will perform even better than in my tests, thanks to his instant damage. And I still consider him no worse than Sun Tzu Prime. Comparing him to Qinshi is pointless. They are commanders of different levels, and Arslan is far from Qinshi, just like basically every commander in the game. Do you need Arslan if you only have one archer march? The answer is no. Arslan is somewhat similar to Qinshi and needs a partner who complements him. Together, they will obviously work well, but you won't get some huge increase in performance. So, if you only have one archer march, skip Arslan. But if you have 2 archer marches, then you definitely need Arslan, and the improvement will be very noticeable. I wouldn't invest in him with 2 archer marches only if you have a serious shortage of gold heads, and in that case, it really makes sense to wait until autumn, when the new archer commander comes out. But I think the new archer will not push Arslan out of the meta. That would be strange from Lilith, to say the least. And as I already said, Arslan is a good commander. He still needs to be tested in real battles, but after all these numerous tests, I can put him on the same level as Sun Tzu Prime. As for the best pair for Arslan, I think it's Zhuge. Because in all of my tests, Hermann had an advantage due to stacking a lot of poison on the targets, but in a real Murderball that won't happen. And I really don't want to give up Zhuge's debuff, because Qinshi already has Yixiong Gaye, and otherwise I'd have to remove Zhuge. On top of that, the third skill will work better with Zhuge. But Hermann is definitely not far behind, and there's no doubt he will make good reports with Arslan. I just seriously doubt that he will be better than Zhuge. I'll make one more video about Arslan where we'll talk in a bit more detail about possible pairs, because this video has already gotten pretty long. Thanks for watching.